Okay, Be'ez Hashem, today's daf, Masechta Zevachim Daf Zayin, and we're going to start from Itmar, which is about like a little about 10 lines from the top. Itmar. So we already learned this many times regarding shechting. When you shecht, you have to have in mind, as you can see, you shecht, you have to have in mind and say out with your mouth what you're shechting for. So the Mishnah says if you're shechting a shlomim and he says that it's for an oila, so the carbon is a kosher carbon, but the owner of the carbon has to bring a new carbon. Okay, so in here we have a problem. Itmar, we learned in the discussion. Toida, a guy who, let's say Reuven, is chayev to bring a carbon toida. Why is he chayev to bring a carbon toida? Because somehow he made a sea voyage and he was, and he was successful. So he wants to bring a carbon taida, and sheshachta, he slaughtered his carbon l'shem taidas chaveroi for the sake of somebody else who needs to bring a taida. Let's say Shimon also was supposed to bring a taida for a different reason. Let's say Shimon was bringing a carbon taida because he was released from jail. So it's not a shinui bailam because and that's usser, that passes the carbon. But here, the guy wants the guy, let's say Reuven who's shechting, he wants his kapara should be his taida should be for himself, and his friend should not have to bring a carbon taida because I'll be yotze you with your carbon taida. You'll be yotze on my carbon taida. Rabba says it's kshera. I guess it's kosher. And what my understanding is that Shimon does not have to bring a carbon taida anymore. He could, but he was yaitza already with Reuven's carbon taida, who shechted it on his behalf. Rav Chizda Ama Pesula. Rav Chizda says it's invalid. So the Gemara says like this: Rabba Ama kshera. Rabba says it's kosher. Taida l'shem taida nishchata. It's like one taida being shechted for shem taida. It's almost like if you shech the chatas, that let's say you did the avera of dam, and you shechted it because you also did an avera of chalev. So then it's a kosher carbon chatas, and because you got you ready when you were mafresh it for a carbon chatas that because you ate blood, and then when you shechted for another avera that you did. It's still a kosher carbon. Rav Chizda says this is different. Pesula, it's not kosher. Why? L'shum shalom the date nishchatam be'inam. You have to shecht it because you're chayev a carbon taida. Let's say you two things, good things happen to you. You were saved by the sea, and also you got up from a sickness. So then you can say it's kosher if you shechted it. You mafresh it because you were saved by sea, and you shechted it because you got healed from a sickness. That would be similar. But here, you're shechting it for your friend's chiyuv toida. Your friend was released from jail, and you said, I'm going to be yotze his toida by my shchita. So then it's puzzle. It's puzzle. The whole carbon is puzzle. Amar Rabba said, how do I know my idea that the carbon would be kosher? If you shech the toida, at least you're shechting it for a carbon toida. It's still a kosher carbon toida. The Tanya we learned in the Brisa, Ubzar Zevach Toida Shalomov B'yoim Hakrivoy Ezivchai. The Torah says the meat of a slaughtering for Shlomim you should eat on that day and that night. That's the halachas of eating a toida. Rabbi Chanan said in the name of Rabbi Lezer, Boy Lelamed, this pasuk teaches you toida sheshachta l'shem shlamim, a toida that you shechted it l'shem shlamim. When you shechted it, a person was mechayev a taida, and he said, "I'm shechting it that it should be like a shlamim, kishera. It's kosher, and therefore you don't have to bring a new carbon taida. It's still called a carbon taida because a taida is a subset of a shlamim. So it's not like you changed the name of the carbon, because a taida is a subset of a shlamim. But what happens? You have a carbon shlamim. You promised to bring a carbon shlamim. When you shechted it, you said shenishchatu l'shem taida. It was geshachtin for the sake of a taida. So there it's a change because you promised to bring a shlamim. It was shechted as a taida. Pesula means it's possible, and therefore You weren't yoitza your shlamim. You have to bring a new carbon shlamim. It's a kosher carbon, you can finish it up, but you have to bring a new carbon shlamim. You aren't yoitza. Ma hefresh ben zelazat, says Rabbi Lezer. What's the difference between the two? Toida kruya shlamim. A toida is a subset of a shlamim. The ain shlamim kruya toida, but a shlamim is not a subset of a toida. So therefore, a shlamim cannot be called a toida. So now comes our discussion. Shlomim l'shem toida pesula. If you shech the carbon shlomim as a carbon toida, then it's possible. Ha toida l'shem toida. If you shech the toida and you kept the name toida, but you said I'm shechting it also on behalf of my friend. So kishera, that would be kosher. So my love, doesn't this apply the chavrei that you're shechting it on behalf of your friend? So this is a proof to Rabbah. That Rabbah said a toida that you shechted in the name of a toida for somebody else is kashera. Answers the Gemara, loy. That's not true. Diday. Only if you shechted the toida for yourself. In other words, you're mechayev. Rashi says you're mechayev to bring a carbon. Let's say because you got saved from the sea, and then when you shechted a toida because you went from the sea. But you shechted it for the toida that God released you from prison. So you really have two carbon toidas, and you messed up by saying that I'm shechting it for the other carbon toida that I'm obligated to. Avo de chavrei, but if you shecht it for your friend's carbon toida, what would be the din? Pesula, it's possible you weren't yotzi your friend and you weren't yotzi yourself. So the Gemara says, if that's the case, why does the Brisa say that if you shech the shlamim for a carbon toida, only then it's possible? Listening, that the Brisa says toida l'shem toida. If you shech the toida for another toida belonging to your friend, it's possible. The kolshkein shlamim, which has the similar name, the kolshkein shlamim l'shem toida, and certainly a shlamim for a toida. So why does the Brisa say that shlamim l'shem toida? Answers the Gemara, because there's a novelty in teaching you that. Shlamim l'shem toida today itzrachle. If you say your carbon shlamim, and you bekoy the carbon shlamim, and you sechted it because saying it's for your carbon toida, that I need you to tell me that is a pasula carbon, and you have to bring a new carbon shlamim. Because I would have thought mid toida kruya shlamim, since it goes in the opposite way, it's kosher. A toida is a subset of shlamim. I would think shlamim namin kruyin toida, that a shlamim also is called a toida. When you shech the shlamim for a toida, likashret, make it kosher. Kamashmalon, the Bryce teaches you that a shlamim for a toida is non-kosher. But huadin, a toida, you shech the toida, but not for your own carbon toida. You shecht it to try to be yotzi your friend who's chayiv a carbon toida, right? So you shecht it, I guess, for yourself and for your friend who's chayiv a carbon toida. It passels the carbon. It passels it. And only if you shecht it for your own carbon toida, if you chayiv two carbon toidas, and you shecht it for the wrong reason that you are mafresh it, then it's bekosher. Nu Gemara. Amar Rava. Now we come to 6 statements of Rava. So it's and that's it. Amar Rava. Rava said, "Chatas sheshachta l'shem chatas." Let's say a person's chayiv chatas because he ate blood, right? And he ate and he also was chayiv carbon chatas because he ate fats, non-kosher fats. So when he shechted the chatas, originally he made the carbon. He thought he was going to bring the carbon because he ate blood, but when he shechted it for the chatas, for the avera that he ate fats. Keshera, that means he's yotza. I guess he would have to bring a new carbon for the blood because he didn't bring a chatas for the avera blood, but he was yotza for the fats, for the non-kosher fats. But l'shem oila, but if he shechted it l'shem oila, I mean the chatas that was shechted, and he said this should be an oila, pesula, then it's pasul, and this is different. Not that you can continue and make it, you finish up the job, you have to throw the whole animal out. My tama, what's the reason? Because it's simple. The pasuk says so. V'shachat oisa l'chatas. When you shecht it, you could only have in mind the word chatas. Amar Achmana, that's what the Torah said. Even if you got the Avera wrong, at the end of the day, you shechted it as a carbon chatas, so therefore it's a kosher. It's koshera. But l'shem oila, but if you shecht it for a carbon oila, psula, that will invalidate the whole carbon. V'yamar Rava said, chatas sheshachtu al mi shemechuyev chatas psula. Here you have you have uh, you have two people. You have two people who are mechayev chatas. Reuven was mechala Shabbos, and Shimon was mechala Shabbos. So Reuven takes his carbon and says, "I'm shechting my carbon on for Shimon. This should be Shimon's carbon, who's also violated Shabbos. Pesula, the whole carbon is possible. Not Reuven was Yotzin, not Shimon. But let's say he shechts his carbon chatas al mi shebechuyev oila on somebody who's mechuyev oila. So then kishera, then it's kosher. It means Reuven was mechal Shabbos by mistake. So he's bringing a carbon chatas and he says, I'm shechting this carbon chatas for somebody who's obligated to bring a carbon oila. Carbon oila was brought by somebody who did an avera, that he was violated an asay, a positive commandment. So the Rava said that is kosher because it's so far off. You're trying to change a chatas to an oila, it's as if you did nothing. So it reverts back to its original carbon chatas, which was to be mechaper on Reuven. My tama, what's the reason? The chipa olav, the Torah says that when you shech the carbon chatas, it brings kapara to you. Olav layachaveri. The Torah says it should bring kapara to you, not to your friend. So chaveri dumi today. It must be that it was a friend that had a similar issue to you. He's obligated to bring a carbon chatas just like you. And the Torah says that if you shech on behalf of your friend's kapara, you aren't yotze, and it's pasul a carbon. So the Torah only pasul if you shech the chatas for somebody else who's mechuyev a chatas. But if you shech the carbon chatas on somebody who's mechuyev a carbon oila, then it's the behema is still kosher. You ignore the oila, you ignore what he said, and it's a regular carbon chatas. Now, Rava said another din. Chatas shechta al mi she'ein chayev klum. If chatas was shechted on somebody who's not obligated to bring anything, he didn't bring anything, so then you would think that it's kosher. You shechted. I'm shechting my carbon chatas for so and so. And that so-and-so had no obligation to bring anything. So then the chatas is possible. You have to throw out the whole animal. Why? Because that person, there's nobody, she'ein lecha adam b'Yisrael, there's no Jewish person, she'ein mechuyev asay, that didn't do an avera, at least of a positive commandment. Every person violated somewhat a positive commandment. Let's say he violated v'ahavta l'reacha kamoicha, right? So every person has an avera. So you shechted your carbon chatas for somebody else who has an avera, and therefore, it's the Torah says that then only then you pasul your carbon chatas. So the Amar Rabba and Rava said another thing. Chatos mechaperes al chayve ese mekal v'choyma. A person who's mechala Shabbos and he's bringing a carbon chatas, let's say, don't think that he only gets a kapara for the avera of chila Shabbos, but he gets also a kapara for some other assays that he did, that he violated, in a backwards way. Really, the carbon chatas is set because he violated a lois assay, that's chayiv kares. But once you bring in the carbon chatas, it brings about an atonement for a chayiv assay, because we're going to say like this: the kal v'choyma al chayiv krisis mechaperes. If the chatas brings atonement for a big averis that you did, let's say chila Shabbos, certainly you bring a kapara for a violation you did in a mitzvah saseh. So we see like this: lememra. Do you want to say the bas minahi? That means that a carbon chatas is it also comes because of a chayve essay. So that if that's the case, Rava said chatas sheshachta al mi shebechuyev chatas pesula al mi shebechuyev oila kashera. Rava said that this is questionable. Rava said if you shech the chatas on somebody who's mechuyev oila, it's kosher. Why should it be kosher? Every person who brings a carbon oila, He's doing so because he feels he violated an assay. So we see, but a chatas also comes because you violated an assay. So they're both like an oila is like maybe a subset of a korban chatas. If it's a subset of a korban chatas, then if you shech the chatas for an oila, the Torah says the shachat oisla chatas of a chipur olav that it shouldn't work. So why did Rava say that if you shech the chatas for someone who's mechuyev an oila, it's kshera if both the oila and the chatas are both being mechaper on a chayve yaseh. We go to Amid Beis. Answers the Gemara, mikivya loy mechapra, mikufya mechapra. In other words, a korban chatas doesn't mechaper on aseh straight up. It's not a set thing, and it only is mechaper mikufya mechaper, in indirect, not a full kapara. And so therefore, you get some kapara, but not a full one until you bring a korban oila. So therefore, it's really an oila is such a different type of korban than a chatas. A chatas is mainly for a loisese, and an oila is mainly for an aseh. Yes, you get some kapara from a chatas from an aseh, but not a full one. So therefore, a chatas and oila can consider two different karbanos, and therefore, if someone shechs a karban chatas and says it's an oila, the Torah says you didn't do anything wrong. We ignore what you said, and it's still a kosher karban chatas. V'yama Rava. Rava said, "Oila sheshachta shloi lishma." You shecht in a karban oila. The shloi lishma guy comes shechted shloi lishma. He said as he's shechting the oila, this is a shlamim. So then you're going to say to yourself, "Oh, once I did something wrong, let me continue to do wrong." Asa lives like dama shloi lishma. You're not allowed to spray any of the blood shloi lishma. You're not allowed to continue the process and say, "Okay, I said shlamim by the shchita. Let's make it. I'm going to say shlamim by the Kabbalah and Halacha and Zrika." Ibay is a mikra. Ibay is a misvara. I have two reasons for that. Ibay is a mikra. I can tell you it's a pasuk. Moitzis v'secha tishmar. The Torah tells you. Moitzi, here's the screen. Moitzis v'secha tishmar. V'asisa kasher nedarta l'Hashem elkecha. Nidava shedibarta bepicha. The Torah starts a korban and says it's a neder, a vow, or a donation. So when you shecht it, it could be a vow or a donation, a keeping of the vow or donation. So with darshan, as we remember in the first parak, like a few pages ago, if you do it right and you shecht the lishma, then you kept your vow. If you did not, then it's a donation, and it's a donation. You have to make it up the vow, but nevertheless, you should not change it because at the end of the day, it's a korban. It's a real korban. And then it makes sense logically. Because you make one mess up, doesn't give you the right to continue messing up. We said if somebody eats garlic, now he has an odor. You're going to tell him to continue to eat garlic? No. V'yama Rava, and Rava said, Oila habal achamisa, an oila. Let's say the guy who had an oila died, and his inheritors, his kids, brought the korban oila that he left over in the estate. And they shachted b'shina hakodesh. And when they shechted it, they shechted saying it's a shlamim. So then they will pasul, and the kids have the responsibility to bring another korban oila. B'shina balim, but let's say they shechted it. And they shechted the oila by saying, this should be an oila for somebody else. Keshera, it's kosher. The ein bailim lachamisa. There's no bailim after the death. Because there's then even though the kids they're not the full owners, so there's no owner in this korban. So what's shinu bailim? You're not changing the bailim because this oila has no owner because the owner died. The kids should bring it up as a korban oila, but that's it. Rav Pinchas Brei, the Rav Ami Amar, Rav Pinchas says yesh bailim lachamisa. There is an owner after the dead. The new owners are the kids. Amalei Rav Asher Rav Pinchas Brei Rav Ami. Did you mean for real that the new owners are the kids, and therefore if they mess up by making a shinui bailim on the korban, they have to bring another korban oila? They have to bring their father's oila, and they get somewhat of a kapara for taking care of their father's korban oila, but it's not their oila. It's their father's oila who's dead. Amalei dafka kamina. Rav Pinchas says it's really the kid's korban oila. The father died. It's now their oila, and if they mess up by shinu bailim, changing the owner, so then they have to bring a new carbon oila. Now the Gemara continues. V'amar Rava said, oila dairenhi. An oila is a gift to God. Says the Gemara, Heichadami. What does that mean? You're giving a gift to God. Eid the like a tshuva, if you didn't do tshuva. Let's say you did an avera. You violated an assay, right? Now you didn't do tshuva, and now you're bringing a gift to God. Zevach Rishayim Te'eva. God is disgusted by carbonus, but by Rishayim. So it must be the Edi Tshuva. You did tshuva. If you did tshuva, then why are you bringing a present? For Tanya, we learned in the Brisa, Aval mitzvah sasei v'shav. If someone violated a mitzvah sasei and did tshuva, loy zaz misham ad shemoichalem loy. They don't move from there. The malachim don't move from there, and it's it until he gets his full kapara. It's as if he did tshuva. So why is he bringing a carbon oila? It's really a gift to the Eibishter. Now, why would you bring a gift to the Eibishter? Because you messed up, you did tshuva, but now you want to make the friendship as it was before, so you bring a new gift. Tanya Nami Hachi, this is what we said. Amrab Shimon Chatas Lama Ba. Why do we bring a carbon chatas? So the Gemara says Lama Ba Lakaper. It's trying to bring you a kapara. Ela Lama Ba Lifnei Oila. When a person is supposed to bring a chatas and an oila at the same time, we tell him bring the carbon chatas first and then the oila. Why does the chatas come before the oila? So we say lepraklit, like a officer, shenichnas, and he wants to speak to the judge, to the king, to forgive the person who has a charge against him. So ritza plaklit, once it was smoothed over by the praklit, nichnas darnakrov, then the person who had the charge against him can now bring a gift. So same thing over here. We first do the tshuva, that's the praklit, and then we allow you to bring a carbon oila to reignite the friendship to the way it once was. Now the Gemara continues and says like this: Chutz min pesach v'achatas. If you shech the Pesach, let's say a carbon Pesach after Chatzos, right? You shech the carbon Pesach or a carbon Chatas, the Mishnah says, and you said, it should be an oila, so the carbon Pesach is possible, you have to throw the whole thing in the garbage. Pesach ben Olam, how do I know a carbon Pesach has to be geshachtem for Lishma? The Pasuk says, Shamash Chodesh Aviv Asisa Pesach. Shiyu kol asiyoisu l'shem Pesach. Whenever you shech the carbon Pesach, you have to mind the shem Pesach. Ashken shinu kodesh shinu balam and olam. How do you know if you change the owner? You shech the carbon Pesach for somebody else that passes the whole carbon. The ksiv amartim zevach Pesachul shehed zvichel l'shem Pesach. When you shecht it, you should have in mind it's a carbon Pesach. Im eine in l'shinu kodesh. If it doesn't teach me anything about changing the name of the carbon, because that I know from Shamar's Chodesh Aviv, Tanei l'shinu bailam. So that teaches you another avera. You're not allowed to change the owner of the carbon. You're not allowed to say, when I'm shechting it for somebody else. So now you have Shinu Kodesh and Shinu Bailam by carbon Pesach. Ashkechan mitzvah. So I see that you have to do it lechatchila, la'akav minolam. But how do you know that if you did it b'di'eved, you have to throw the whole carbon out? Maybe the Torah is telling you lechatchila, say in mind who's the owner and what the carbon is. But if you mess it up, that's okay. How do you know b'di'eved it's no good? Amakra v'zavach Pesach l'Shem Elokecha. Another pasuk. So b'di'eved it's no good. Maskef law, Rav Safra asked the question, does that come for this? I need the Zvach to teach you what Rav Nachman taught us. What happens? How do we know that if I have a leftover carbon Pesach? How do you have a leftover carbon Pesach? I had a carbon Pesach, I lost it, and then I mafresh another one, and then I found the first one after I was makar of the carbon Pesach. So what do you do with the found carbon Pesach that was lost? You bring it as a carbon shalomim. Shenema was the Pesach shem lekechat soinu bakar. You should shech the extra carbon Pesach as you would shech something that's brought from sheep and cattle. What do you mean? You're not shechting it as a carbon Pesach because a carbon Pesach comes from sheep and goats. You shech the carbon Pesach that you find after you yotze your carbon Pesach. You find it, you bring it as a carbon shlamim. So Vizavachta teaches you, Vizavachta Pesach L'Shem Elokecha teaches you should bring it as a carbon shlamim. If you were yotze your carbon Pesach, so then you bring the carbon Pesach as a shlamim. So how do I know that it's ma'akiv. How do you know? But the eved that if you shecht a carbon pesach with shina kodesh or shini balim, how do you know it's b'di'evet the whole carbon is possible? Says the Gemara. Amar Elam Rav Safra. Rav Safra explains Zvach the pesach Rav Nachman. Shomas kodesh avil mitzvah b'shina kodesh v'martim zevach b'shina balim the mitzvah. Who? There's a pasuk that says who la'akiv bein hacha v'hacha. Who means it's for sure. You can't change it. That and if you do, the whole carbon is partial. Now the Gemara says, "V'ashkan zvicha shar avodas menalan." I see the zvicha. If you check the carbon pesach and you get it wrong, throw the whole carbon out. What happens if I do other avodas? The other four services, hilacha, kabbalah, zrika. How do you know that b'di'evet it's no good? Answers the Gemara, hoyel begali gali. Since we know that zvicha is no good, so we'll say it also by the hilacha and Kabbalah halacha and zrika, it's also no good. Concludes the Gemara. Rav Ashi Yama, hay v'gali lemrina. We have to have a source. El avodas menolan. How do I know by the other services regarding the carbon pesach would it passel b'di eved if you have a shinu kodesh and a shinu balam? The pasuk says zois atar la'oila mincha lachatas l'shamim. One pasuk says all the karbonas. The Tanya. So all the karbonas are written in one pasuk. All the karbonas are like the carbon shlamim. Ma shlamim, just like a carbon shlamim, ben shinu kodesh, ben shinu balam, be'ina l'mitzvah. Af kol ben shinu kodesh, ben shinu balam l'mitzvah. Every shlamim, every carbon, there's a mitzvah to say the carbon and who the owner is. Ukishlamim, we can compare it to shlamim. Ma shlamim ben zvicha ben sha'ar avodas loichalakta ben l'mitzvah. By shlamim, it's only a din lechatchila, right? So also a pesach loitachla ben zvicha l'shar avodas. We're not going to make a differentiation between zvicha l'shar avodas. Once I know zvicha is because of an extra pasuk, once I know zvicha because of an extra pasuk, it's ma'aka b'di'evet. So then automatically all the other avodas are a hold up b'di'evet because you have this juxtaposition to shlamim. So the Gemara says Allahu lamali. Then you have the extra pasuk who. Keditanya nema pasuk pesach who b'shchita la'akiv. Only a carbon pesach b'di'evet you throw out. Aval asham le'nema bahu. It says who el la'achach taras emerim. V'atzmei shek de'emerav kashav. By carbon asham it says also the word who, but it's way after. It talks about who after you bring the offerings onto the mizbeach. So, and even if you don't bring the stuff onto the mizbeach, it's always going to be a kosher carbon. So who, by carbon asham, is not pedantic. And therefore, if you should have in mind by a carbon asham, who you're shechting it for and what the carbon is, but the evid it's kosher. But by a carbon chatas, once you think the wrong thought, automatically the carbon is going to be pasul. Okay. A guten Yontev.